Now, if you tuned into our incredible channel, we looked at Cyberpunk 2077's junk heap of glitches, bugs, and outright failures. For a game that was one of the most anticipated video games of all time, it quickly became one of the biggest disappointments of 2020, and there have been many controversies surrounding it. Join us now as WrestleGamia looks at Cyberpunk 2077. What happened? Cyberpunk was first announced in 2012. Based on the popular tabletop role-playing game Cyberpunk, the game promised an open-world story of a dystopian future where the protagonist seeks to achieve immortality through an incredible new piece of technology. The game's premise sounded intriguing, a combination of The Matrix and Grand Theft Auto, and the preview videos looked incredibly appealing. Equally important to the anticipation for Cyberpunk was the developer's reputation for quality. Polish video game developer and publisher CD Projekt rose to fame with the release of its 2007 PC game The Witcher and sequels for PC, phones, and console systems. CD Projekt earned a reputation for quality and engaging games, and later when microtransactions soured players on games, CD Projekt vowed not to produce any games with microtransactions. Now, in case you're not a gamer or haven't played video games in a long time, microtransactions are in-game transactions where players can purchase virtual goods. Some video games that players pay for also offer microtransactions. For example, a player might buy a weapon or a new character via a microtransaction. They have proved lucrative for game developers, but drawn criticism from players who see the process as pay to win, and worse, a way for game companies to sell a game and charge more for the content that players feel should have been included in the original game. EA Games' Star Wars Battlefront 2 became the poster child for microtransactions, as it was heavily criticized for it, so much so that some nations described them as gambling, calling on them to be banned. CD Projekt's policy of no microtransactions and a focus on quality has led to lots of praise for the company. However, the same standards it has built have made for lofty expectations that critics argue it didn't adhere to with the development and release of Cyberpunk 2077. In 2017, CD Projekt president issued statements on the game, leading to online concerns that the company was changing its business model to a more commercial approach rather than making games just to entertain. When the YouTube channel Good Gaming commented on this in a video, CD Projekt tweeted, "Worry not, when thinking CP 2077, think nothing less than TW3, huge single-player, open-world, story-driven RPG. No hidden catch, you get what you pay for, no bullshit, just honest gaming like with Wild Hunt. We leave greed to others." Now that may have been true with past games, but it's certainly not so with CD Projekt's new release. There are many controversies surrounding the game, including the ethics of how it was made, performance issues, content, and CD Projekt's failure to take responsibility for producing a poor product. One controversy surrounding Cyberpunk is how CD Projekt made its developers work long hours to try and get the game out this year. The process is known as crunch time and involves developers working nights and even weekends. It's considered one of the seamier sides of the gaming industry, and CD Projekt more or less forcing its employees to work these hours drew criticism. Their statement that crunch time was not mandatory were ridiculed by observers who are familiar with the industry's reputation for long hours before a game's release. A report at Bloomberg shows the pressure imposed on developers and standards that were likely impossible to reach. They noted several current and former staff who worked on Cyberpunk 2077 have all said the same thing. The game's deadlines, set by the board of directors, were always unrealistic. It was clear to many of the developers that they needed more time. The game's developers have criticized CD Projekt's management, not only for the crunch time, but before it releasing the game when it was not ready. Now, there are many flaws with this game, so many that we recently released a video covering the game's glitches, bugs, and many other problems. We won't repeat the video, but merely state a few, such as the game inexplicably crashing on players, instances where a player's vehicle crashes for no reason, and visual glitches that might be funny if there weren't so many of them. Just when it seems like the game can't get any worse, new glitches and even dangers come out. Recently, a fan noted that save files over 8 MB may be permanently corrupted. A more pressing concern, though, is for the players who suffer from epilepsy. A reviewer at Game Informer reported suffering a grand seizure while playing the game, and charted a number of areas where individuals who deal with epilepsy might suffer seizures. And one of the biggest complaints about Cyberpunk is that it's virtually unplayable on last-generation console systems, i.e. the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. As we'll see, there are problems on next-gen consoles like the PS5 along with high-end gaming PCs, but fans who purchased the game for older consoles report seemingly endless glitches and crashes. The excuse that Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't designed to run on older consoles hadn't gone over well with players who note that the game was first announced in 2012, a time when such consoles were the only game in town. Add in the fact that next-gen consoles like the Xbox X and PS5 are extremely difficult, if not impossible, to acquire, and players' frustrations with the game's near inability to run on last-gen consoles is understandable. There's also something to be said for Microsoft and Sony approving the game for release on its consoles, but that's a story for another day. Some critics have argued that the game was not sent to reviewers in time for gamers to make an informed decision about purchasing the game for a last-gen console. A recent New York Times article revealed the company only shared advanced copies of the PC version with gaming publications and news organizations, previewing the best possible version of Cyberpunk to reviewers who would post their ratings online just days before the game's release. CD Projekt claims that's not the case. We were updating the game on last-gen consoles until the very last minute and thought we'd make it in time. Unfortunately, this resulted in giving it to reviewers just one day before the release, which was definitely too late, and the media didn't get a chance to review it properly. That was not intended, we were just fixing the game until the very last moment. Another controversy deals with what some critics claim is cultural appropriation in the game's online world. This was raised in 2019 when the game was still being developed. For example, there is a gang known as the Voodoo Boys, which were white characters in the original tabletop RPG, but which are now black Haitians who speak Haitian Creole. Critics point out the game is exploiting culture to sell games. However, Mike Pondsmith, the game's creator, refuted the criticism. The original Voodoo Boys were a scathing commentary on cultural appropriation. I love the idea that real practitioners of voodoo moved in and took back their turf, and they even got a Creole right. For the expletive, do you think you are to tell me whether or not my creation was done right or not? As Cyberpunk has so many in-game criticisms that the cultural appropriation aspect hasn't been investigated to see if the complaints are an instance of someone creating controversy. However, the next controversy is not as easily dismissed. Another deals with Cyberpunk's depiction of transgender characters as well as other members of the LGBTQ+ community. One point of contention is how the game determines characters' genders. The site Comic Book Resources point out that only deep-voiced characters can be identified as male, while higher-pitched characters are identified as female, which purports the harmful idea that people's genders can be identified by certain traits. The game has come under fire by some LGBTQ+ advocates who argue the game fetishizes and objectifies trans bodies, and that there is no apparent LGBTQ+ visibility elsewhere in Cyberpunk 2077. If the game's depiction of transgender characters is inaccurate and worse, exploitative, it's another example of CD Projekt failing to adhere to its high standards. But the biggest question about Cyberpunk 2077 right now is whether it should have been released. The game's many flaws on last-gen systems have been documented, but even players who purchased the game for high-end gaming PCs or next-gen consoles report various difficulties. The current online reviews range from excellent to negative, but surprisingly, there are a number of positive reviews. However, there's no shortage of harsh criticism in gamer areas such as Reddit and gaming channels. It's safe to say that at best, Cyberpunk 2077 has divided gamers on their assessment of it, and at worst, is seeing a massive scramble for players to get their money back. CD Projekt's joint CEO Adam Kaczynski responded to the criticism about the game's performance, or lack of performance on the PS4 and Xbox One, with the following statement during a conference call. After 3 days, we as the management board were too focused on releasing the game. We underestimated the scale and complexity of the issues, we ignored the signals about the need for additional time to refine the game on the base last-gen consoles. This caused the loss of gamers' trust and the reputation that we've been building through a big part of our lives. To no one's surprise, gamers have demanded refunds, arguing Cyberpunk 2077 is a garbage game that in some cases is totally unplayable. Initially, they seem to understand the fans' plight, agreeing to refunds. However, the company's response seems more like lip service. First, the company made no overt efforts to offer refunds, but told customers how to go about getting refunds from retailers. Second, CD Projekt has not reduced the cost of the game, instead saying it's working hard to produce patches. It's understandable why some gamers see CD Projekt as taking no ownership of their problem. Don't think so? Consider the following corporate double talk from the company regarding the game's many problems. The game is playable right now. That may be an important thing to state because it's not like the game does not launch or is unplayable, but not playable sounds like it doesn't launch at all, which is not the case. And it's another example of how CD Projekt is avoiding any responsibility for its complete failure. Despite its abundance of flaws, Cyberpunk started off strong, with the game becoming the fastest-selling PC game. In fact, CD Projekt has reportedly already recouped the game's development costs. The game sold well and seemed to be a hit. That is until many controversies emerged. Clearly, the number of flaws inherent in the game have led to a powerful backlash by players who expected so much and got so little. Gamers have demanded refunds and CD Projekt's stock has taken a hit, with the company suffering a 29% drop after its release. In addition to its financial failures, CD Projekt's reputation has been tarnished, with some gamers feeling the company sold out in order to release the game in a timely fashion, rather than when its design flaws were fixed. Add in the bad press about the much maligned labor practice of a crunch schedule, and CD Projekt now looks like just another gaming company looking to make a fast buck, even if its product is rubbish and its workplace ethics are based on convenience. CD Projekt's future may be more dystopian than any other future depicted in Cyberpunk 2077. According to the New York Times, lawyers and investors in Warsaw are circling the situation, contemplating a class action lawsuit for potential crime misrepresentation in order to make financial profit. Sagging stock shares, demands for refunds, and a devastating blow to the company's reputation for high quality, and CD Projekt's Cyberpunk 2077 may end up as a trivia question for what was the developer's last game. Have you played Cyberpunk 2077? If so, what's your honest opinion of it? Let us know in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more WrestleGamia content.